Captain Midnight.
Alright, so I know there's a decent chance that the title of this video made you think Hulu, that B or C tier streamer that's basically a Disney Plus add-on now? What could possibly be so dramatic and important about them? Well, this is a video I've wanted to make for a long time because I think one of the most under-discussed aspects of the last 20 years of Hollywood is just how much the big studios screwed themselves over with Hulu. How they took their biggest chance to take on Netflix before it outpaced them all and self-sabotaged through short-sightedness and greed. I think there's a story of hubris and idiocy here, and I want to get into it. Before I do, thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, I am trying to get to 750k subscribers before the end of the year, and I'd really appreciate it. So with that said, let's talk about this.
Yeah, and to finish it off, we got Hulu. Hulu blasts enough free TV to your lappity-toppity boxes.
On March 12, 2008, Hulu launched to the American public after a short beta period, and followed that up with a pricey marketing campaign featuring Alec Baldwin at the Super Bowl the next year. It had been a little over a year since Netflix Instant debuted, and slowly but surely started to shift viewing habits for good. That head start was significant, but it didn't seem insurmountable for Hulu. Because this wasn't just any streaming service, this was a joint venture from Hollywood's most powerful players. NBC Universal and News Corp, which was Fox, and Disney getting on board a little bit later with ABC in 2009. It is hard to overstate just how much of the media landscape these companies controlled when Netflix Instant launched. Netflix had spent around a decade mailing people DVDs. I know hindsight is 2020, but seriously, how did they screw this up so badly? I don't think it was the consumer experience. Speaking personally, I loved Hulu back in 2008. It was new, it had a great library, and incredibly, it was free, which I know feels crazy now. I watched so much Parks and Rec and 30 Rock on there. Netflix Instant was definitely no slouch in its early days, but Hulu really did have something special, with new shows being available the day after they aired. That felt really miraculous at the time, and it was something that Netflix, who of course did not have a TV channel to lean on, just couldn't compete with, especially in the days before they had originals. All these Hollywood giants had to do was starve Netflix Instant. License them absolutely no TV or movies, while continuing to let them do their DVD business. Hulu could have swept the board, and then they could have all fought amongst themselves after they'd won, having left Netflix in the dust. Maybe you could accuse me of oversimplifying things, like maybe Netflix still would have found a way to become what it is without the mountains of movies and shows that those studios handed them in the late 2000s and early 2010s. But I just really don't think so. The fact is, it seems like the importance of streaming really snuck up on Hollywood in a way that just seems insane now. Anthony Suhu, former vice president of CBS Interactive, was saying things like, "Our whole belief about online is it's very complementary to what happens on television." And for a time, maybe that was true. But the writing on the wall was there that streaming was eventually going to eat linear television alive. Like, that wasn't difficult to see. I was reading a lot of television coverage and critics back then, and I feel like that was just generally understood. But to the big studios of the day, no, streaming was a complement to old school TV, not a replacement for it. Maybe even a way to boost their ratings by helping viewers catch up on past seasons. I'll get into that theory a little bit later. Now, did they really believe this? I kind of doubt it. I think what's more likely is they said what they needed to keep investors at ease and make a lot of short-term money while the sun was still shining, surrendering the future to chase the next quarter's growth. But now I'm getting into bigger problems here, so let's zoom back in on how it impacted Hulu specifically. On paper, this was a streamer that had everything going for it. I think it was a good service. Like, sure, that early video quality wouldn't be acceptable now, but back then it was totally fine, and the selection was more than solid. I feel like people don't remember this, but it was one of the earliest places that you could stream the Criterion Collection, along with all these more mainstream shows. And with the combination of all these studios, it really felt like it should have been a Hollywood super team or something, like the 2012 Miami Heat. but not really. It was more like the 2012 Miami Heat if LeBron, Wade, and Bosh were also, playing for other teams that they considered more important. That's a roundabout way of saying that these studios were never really on the same page. They teamed up, but it didn't go all in. I guess more like the 2021 Brooklyn Nets. Okay, I'll stop talking about the NBA now. They all had their own things going on, like how hard NBC was pushing their own website at the time, or were cutting their best deals elsewhere. Like Disney selling a bunch of movies to Stars, which then licensed tons of stuff to Netflix on the cheap. One of the single best deals Netflix ever made, and which slowly trained viewers to expect major titles like Toy Story 3 to pop up on streaming shortly after theaters. Now, to be clear, I am not crying any tears for these studios. Netflix Instant was an incredible deal at the time, and I, along with many of you I'm sure, watched tons of great stuff thanks to deals like that. But it's absolutely incredible how completely backwards Hollywood's thinking was during these years. You had all these executives, at least publicly, acting like streaming was some small accessory to real entertainment, not seeming to realize it just was the future. The thing that would eventually leave their cable networks, DVD sales, and ad departments in shambles. I feel like NBC never stopped thinking of Hulu as like a fancy online rerun machine meant to boost their core product. And that kind of thinking made Hulu much more cautious about trying really anything new. Strategies that made sense for Hulu in the long run. Things that could actually help it evolve into what Netflix was rapidly becoming. That drive just wasn't there. You saw examples of this everywhere. Like, to pick on NBC again, they were so gun-shy about putting more than just clips of SNL on Hulu, preferring to keep them on their own website, which just made Hulu feel less essential and like a half measure. There's a famous line from Mike in Breaking Bad about avoiding half measures, and I think that's fitting, as Breaking Bad specifically had a role to play in deluding Hollywood into feeling like Netflix could help their cable business instead of destroying it. People forget this now, but Breaking Bad was far from a hit in its early seasons on AMC. It hit Netflix in 2011 and then blew up in a huge way. By its finale, it was getting 10 million views on AMC versus the season 4 finale's 2 million. And this became a massive talking point for all the cable suits back then. This idea that the recipe there was endlessly repeatable and was their clear path forward. And while you probably could point to more minor examples of this happening, like Riverdale, for the most part, I just don't really think that materialized. By 2018, a show like You was a much better example of the relationship between the cable channels and Netflix. Its first, and still best season, was a Lifetime show that basically no one watched until it went to Netflix. By then, it was too late. Lifetime had canned the show, and Netflix resurrected it and reaped all the rewards. And all the while, Netflix was being given some of these studios' most popular shows and movies. It's strange to me how almost indifferent they seemed to Hulu back then, because it's not like it was failing. By the early 2010s, it had millions of users and great name recognition in the US. But it seems like inside the company, it was kind of a mess. You had 3 massive corporations that hated sharing control with each other, all trying to dictate the direction. These studios just could not work together long enough to build it into the Netflix slayer they clearly needed it to be. Every big decision at Hulu apparently needed unanimous board approval, which meant that every time one company disagreed with something, just nothing happened. That resulted in a pretty incoherent catalog and no clear strategy for things like international expansion, something that became more and more vital every single year. Hollywood basically built one of the most promising platforms in entertainment history and then designed the corporate equivalent of an engine that only ran when 3 drivers pressed the gas at the exact same time. Jason Kilar, Hulu's first CEO, seemed to realize this. When they first introduced a paid tier, he reportedly threatened to quit over the proposed $9.99 price point, thinking it was just way too expensive. Man, those were the days, huh? He apparently pushed hard for a way more competitive $4.99 a month before compromising at $7.99. Then, in 2011, he wrote a now infamous blog post arguing that the old TV model was archaic and that viewer control and flexibility were the future, which obviously he kind of ended up being right about. But this didn't go over well with his bosses, with one exec saying, "You're supposed to promote the business you represent, not say, don't buy cable." Eventually, he left, replaced by a leadership team more willing to play second fiddle to the studio's other plans. Eventually, Netflix firmly secured their place in entertainment culture, and not just in the US. They were pumping out tons of originals, and the big studio's movies and TV became a little bit less important to them, putting them in a much better position. It was clear by then that the biggest names in Hollywood had gotten outflanked by a DVD mail service. For years, these studios had gotten addicted to the easy money they could reap from Netflix licensing deals instead of funding Hulu's long-term growth. The same studios, whose output were supposed to be the heart of Hulu's library, were selling their best shows to the competition because it looked good on that year's balance sheet. Now, the short-term logic did make sense, and honestly, people don't tend to last long in these positions, so going for the short-term play probably felt logical. Netflix was paying millions upfront for the rights to these shows. I'm sure that just looked great to shareholders, but long term, it was just clearly a disaster. These deals trained audiences to think of Netflix as the default place to stream big shows and even big blockbusters and movies. And these studios fed that image every step of the way. While you could catch new episodes of Parks and Rec or The Office on Hulu, where were all the past seasons? Netflix. When the Fox X-Men movies were streaming in the early 2010s, where did they go? Netflix. Now, I don't want to oversimplify too much here. It's not as simple as saying, oh, The Office is an NBC show, therefore it would have been really easy for them to put it on Hulu. No, they would have had to pay top dollar for these shows when they go out on the market. That's just how these contracts work. I believe the producers of Bones actually sued over this. But you're some of the biggest entertainment companies in the world. Just pay the price. Netflix was certainly willing to, because they knew how important nabbing these shows could be. By the time the studios realized what they'd done here, it was just too late. Netflix had nearly a decade's head start, their own hit shows, and a ton of audience buy-in. So when they all tried to start their own thing in the late to mid 2010s, again, kind of ignoring Hulu, they came to find out that actually audiences weren't willing to jump over to Peacock for stuff they had become accustomed to watching on Netflix, even if those shows were things that NBC considered their crown jewels. And while all this was going on, Hulu was still basically locked to the US, becoming a completely B or C tier player despite breaking into the conversation occasionally with shows like Handmaid's Tale. Netflix was global and had been for a very long time. And by the late 2010s, Hulu was clearly an afterthought, mostly being held down by the often great stuff that FX continues to put out. Disney became the majority owner in 2019 after buying Fox, and then they bought NBC Universal out of Hulu in 2023. But even then, they already had Disney Plus as its priority. So instead of doubling down on a unified Hulu at any point, the studio splintered off to launch their own competitors. Hulu, once the best hope to ward off Netflix's domination, became kind of a dated experiment that no one was eager to fully invest in, but had too many subscribers to do away with. So now it's getting folded into Disney Plus, with its name replacing Star around the world, in what almost feels like an ironic punchline. Like Hulu is finally available worldwide, as a husk of its former self. They stopped being a competitor to Netflix and just became another tab on Disney Plus. The final stop for what had once been Hollywood's best shot at owning the future. In the end, it seems like Hulu was destroyed by short-term profits and paralysis. A promising idea from three companies that wanted to win, but couldn't stand the thought of winning together. The people at the top, the ones sitting on that old-school media money, just couldn't bring themselves to sacrifice a dime in the short term for long-term dominance. And look, at the end of the day, these streaming services were probably always going to find a way to recreate cable anyway. That appears to basically be where we are now. So for viewers, maybe this Hulu story isn't that big of a deal, but for these companies, I mean, wow, Netflix is worth significantly more than Disney, NBC Universal, and News Corp put together. Which is pretty funny because Hulu, I truly think, could have been it. The thing that unified Hollywood's power base and changed the digital landscape. Instead, it's a story of how powerful industries destroy themselves from the inside. Not through lack of money or talent, but because of pure greed and a total lack of vision. So, just by the nature of this channel, I am talking about art produced by large corporations most of the time. I have a good time with it, but it also feels great to be able to recommend something from a true solo artist. Something that one person poured their heart and soul into. And that's the Angelarium books by artist Peter Moorbacher. One of the most ambitious solo artist projects you're going to come across. Peter was inspired by how many named angels there are across world history and wanted to create something special. A fully illustrated, story-driven encyclopedia of the divine. This is his interpretation of those beings, angels and concepts from across different religions and belief systems. There's a real story here too. The Book of Emanations and the Book of Watchers are surreal takes on the Angelarium itself as a physical space. It's a mind-bending journey with incredible art. Peter believes in these books, and he wanted to let you know about them. Once I had a look, I was really happy to share them. Now, you can get both Angelarium books on sale together for $85, which is 15% off the original price, but if you use my code MIDNIGHT20 at checkout, you'll get another 20% off that price. So that's less than $70 for 2 books with tons of amazing illustrations. That same code will also get you 20% off everything in the shop, which includes some really great stuff like collectible cards and even playmats. So visit that link down below and use my code MIDNIGHT20 to get an additional 20% off both books when you buy them together or anything else in the shop.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.